All right. My name, since you guys haven't met me yet, my name is Tom. I am an educator here at Cheehaw Park and Zoo. And what we're doing is we've been doing some weekly lessons, but I heard you've been doing them with Miss Ashley, so that's great. But I'm very excited to have you here with me today. And today we're going to be talking about a topic that's really important. Um, and we'll be sure to end with lots of discussion as to what's going on to help out and what maybe even some of you guys can do to help out a little bit. So bear with me. We're going to talk about today microplastics, which is a form of pollution. So today we're going to jump into something that's a little bit more focused, right, on an impact to the environment, right? So who knows any different kinds of pollutions? Anybody have any ideas? Yeah, I see a hand in the way back.
What's some pollution? Smoke from factories. I heard smoke and what? From factories. He said smoke from factories.
Absolutely, right? So we have lots of factories that are giving off chemicals into the air, sure. Very true. Did I see a hand in the front there with the white t-shirt? Yeah.
Oh, Hayden, bring your hand up. All right, Eli, what'd you say? From cars. He said from cars.
Absolutely. That's a great example. Very true. Right here in the front with the white t-shirt.
Oh. That's what Tom said.
Yep.
What is? Okay, vehicles.
Yeah, so these are all fantastic examples, but today we're going to talk about one really specific. So we're going to talk about plastics, right? Or trash in general, right? Like we know lots of trash can get away from areas where we put them, right? But one that we're going to focus on is plastic. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because I have a presentation we can view. Miss Murphy, can you guys see my screen if I share it? Can they see me?
Usually we can see you, and then there's like a tiny little screen of you.
Yep.
Right now, all we see is you.
Okay. All right. So if I share it, will you let me know if you can? Can you see my presentation now?
Oh, yes.
Okay. All right. So we are going to talk about plastics that can get into our environment, because that's what we're really focused on, right? Is where all these plastics are coming from and how they're getting into our environment. So we want them to be in places like trash cans or confined areas, and ideally we would want them to be, most of our trash to be recycled, right? Like we want it to go somewhere where it can be recycled. And I'm sure, have you all heard of recycling? Yes. And try to do your best to do it. Yep, great. So let's just talk about really quick some background, where our plastics come from. So there's two primary areas where they come from, and that includes when things wash from on land into the waters, and we call this runoff. So really runoff from areas on land into our water is one place it can come from, or it can just be from water sources themselves from urban environments. So when we're thinking about trash that runs off from the land or washes into the water from the land, it can come from two different areas, and that can be primarily from landfills. So you can see up top that picture of a landfill, which is where we dump all of our trash. And so things can wash out of those landfills and still get into our water, our waters, or there's just a whole lot of variety of areas where plastics can come from. And that can include anything like the lines on roads where you see, our strips, our paint that creates our like lanes, or even things like clothing and sneakers. So it's kind of incredible to think about, but all of the little fibers in your clothes even contain little microplastics And I want you guys to pay attention to that word, microplastics, because that's what we're going to shift into talking about a little bit more. And then there's another one. So we talked about it can just come straight from water sources themselves in urban environments, right? And so a couple places, examples of where that can come from is, again, when we're washing our clothes in washing machines, you know, we shed off thousands of little pieces of microplastics in the fibers in our clothes. And even, which is kind of wild to think about, there are things called little microbeads that were designed to be built into things like soaps and toothpaste that were made to help clean you. So when you're scrubbing or when you're brushing your teeth, those little microbeads help to clean. But those are actually little tiny pieces of plastic that will oftentimes get through like drains and water filters. And because they're so small and they can get through those different areas, they can end up in natural water, like in our oceans or in our rivers and our streams. And that's really what we're focusing on, right? Is where, so we're talking about these sources of pollution, where they come from, but the bigger problem is where they're going, which is into our natural environments that we want to keep really, really clean, right? So we're going to talk about microplastics a little bit more in terms of what they are. So microplastics are any piece of plastic that is less than 5 millimeters in length. And to put that into perspective, or to give you an idea of how small that is, that's just like a little tiny sesame seed, right? Or anything even smaller than that. And sometimes it's going to be even smaller than that. And so, right, when we think about plastic, we think about a water bottle or something like that. So that's just a big piece of plastic. But we're talking about plastics that break down into things that are smaller than tiny little seeds. And how do these even form? Right? Where do these little tiny pieces of plastic come from? Well, it's from bigger pieces of plastic, like our water bottles, getting broken down over time. So have you guys ever heard of like sand getting washed from rocks and washing in the different environments? It's kind of the same thing in that these larger pieces of plastic will also break down from things like the sun and the wind and water, just breaking it down into tiny little pieces. But then also some of them are produced, such as those microbeads I was talking about that are added into our soaps and our toothpaste. So those are also a way that they can be formed and enter into our environment. Okay, and so let's think about like where plastics can be found, what ecosystems can they be found in? And the short answer is pretty much everywhere now. But primarily we find them in our oceans and in major bodies of water, like the Great Lakes that I have pictured there. But we do know that they're also in ecosystems on land now. So for example, some studies have been done to show that they are in our farmlands now as well. So they are found in lots of different environments. But a lot of research has taken place on how much microplastics is found in our oceans, and we know that it's a lot. And so then the question becomes, okay, so these microplastics are getting into our waters, right? Like our oceans and even things like our rivers and our streams and our lakes. So what animals have these microplastics? And really the first thing we think about is really small animals, like mussels or even little plankton that I have pictured here. And these animals consume these tiny little pieces of plastic because they're so small that they can be consumed by these really small animals. If you think about mussels that are what we call filter feeders, and they just kind of filter in a lot of water, when they're filtering in water to eat, they're also going to take in these microplastics. Now, have you guys talked about it all in school yet? Food webs or food chains?
No.
No? Okay, so really quick, I guess I also have here that smaller animals such as shrimp and things like that and small fish are then going to eat those even smaller animals that I was talking about, like the plankton and mussels, and that's going to be really important. So I'm going to talk about um, food chains really quick. And so what that idea is that if we have those really small animals that I was talking about, like those plankton, if you see, they're at the bottom of that picture I have on the right. And as you go up that food chain, essentially larger animals are going to eat smaller animals, right? Um, so if we know that those little tiny pieces of plastic are in those smaller animals, such as our plankton, and then something bigger like a fish eats those plankton, what do you think those fish are going to get when they eat the plankton? They're going to get the plastics that are in the little plankton, right? So what we call a food chain is the order in which energy or food moves up throughout its environment. So all of these animals are found in the same ecosystem, right? Where they're found in the same environment. And then if one animal eats another, it's going to get everything that was also in that other animal. So they eat them because they need food and energy, right? But unfortunately, they're also going to get some of the bad things like the plastics. And it's going to move up the food chain. And so this is just the bottom of one food chain, but then bigger fish are going to eat even that smaller fish. And then let's say maybe a bird is going to eat those bigger fish. And what's going to keep happening is that plastic is going to keep working up the food chain with those animals as well. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yes, sir.
All right, awesome. You guys are doing great. So then that's one form of how plastics can be found in our animals. But another way is that animals may just accidentally eat plastics without even knowing they're eating it, because they think they're feeding on things that are more natural. And so we'll look at an example of this in just 1 second. So these are example of larger animals that plastics can be found in. So some things like whales are also, they just roam around and they filter in food so they could get plastics like that. Birds are an example of one of those animals that may eat things lower on the food chain and get the plastics that way. So these are our seagulls, right, found out by our beach. And then there's our sea turtle, which we all love, right? Really pretty animal, really cool animals. But they have a different kind of problem in terms of how they get plastic in their system. And they actually sometimes they could go for plastics that are even bigger than microplastics. And not even microplastics, just big pieces of plastic. And that's in the form of, who can tell me what I have pictured here?
Jellyfish.
But are all those pictures jellyfish?
Oh.
Which pictures aren't jellyfish?
The first one. No, the second one. No. First is second.
So what?
The green.
Yeah, awesome. So what are they?
Plastic. What kind of plastic?
It's like a plastic bag, right? All right, so even for us, as soon as I flash that up, we all jump to jellyfish, right? But we are able to recognize now, after looking at it a bit longer, some of those aren't actually jellyfish, some of those are plastic bags, right? But do you think a turtle is going to be able to recognize that and make that conclusion?
No, clear. It ain't clear. Just like water.
They're just going to think it's a piece of plastic, and a poor sea turtle might eat that plastic bag, right? Because it does look somewhat similar, right?
Yeah.
So that's a really big concern as well, is that we can tell the difference, but they may not be able to. And therefore, they may try to eat bigger pieces of plastic like that. But that was perfect. Okay, so the problem is that plastics aren't good. Obviously, we do not want plastics in our animals, right? That's not good for them. It can be bad for their reproductive system, or not their reproductive, sorry, their digestive systems, right? How they break down their food, and it can be bad for that. So, it's not natural. It's not a food source that they should be consuming, especially not big ones like that plastic bag. And so it's not great for them. So it's not good, but how much of it is actually out there? And so we talked about this a little bit already, a lot. And just to recap, right? It's found in, it's found primarily in bodies of water, like our oceans and our rivers and our lakes, but it can also be found in soils. And then if it's in our soils, it can get into things like our plants. And you can see, and it kind of works the same way as we were talking about in our aquatic environments, how it can work up in our terrestrial environments. It can also work up, right? Because if it gets in our plants, then if animals eat our plants, then it can get into the animals. And you guys get the picture. Okay, so while that's the background on it, let's focus on the good news. What do you think are some of the primary ways that we can help solve this issue?
Recycling.
Recycling is a really big one, and that can happen at many different levels. There can be increasing efforts from the state level to put restrictions on recycling or say how much needs to be recycled, all the way to local towns. So to give you guys a story, who knows where Maine is? Does anybody know where the state of Maine is? Who can tell me?
New England.
New England. I heard New England. That's fantastic. So it's all the way up north where it's cold, right? So I went to school in Maine, and the town I actually lived in, where the university is they have this program or this system in place called pay as you go or pay per bag. And what that meant is you had to actually buy your trash bags, special trash bags, with labels on it, like you're seeing in this picture, where the garbage men could easily identify if you paid for your trash bag or not. And so, do you guys want to pay for your trash bags, individual trash bags? No, right? You just want to go buy a bulk package. So what that does is that kind of makes people want to use less trash, right? So if I know I'm going to have to go pay for special trash bags that can only be picked up if I have those special trash bags, I'm going to try to recycle way more. And I'm going to really put in my effort to put as much as I can into that recycling bin that's free, right? And so the idea is they want to create motivation for people through these programs to use less trash overall, or to, in other words, put more effort into recycling. And I thought it was a really cool system. It's a way to just, get people to generate less trash. And so hopefully, this will take place in other places, or other programs will start to come into place that will hopefully get people to generate less trash and to recycle more. And so this example's a little, it's a little out there and extreme that they actually make people pay for their trash bags. But I can tell you, when I was in Maine, I definitely used less trash because I didn't want to buy as many of those bags. And then there's other places. So where I used to live in Delaware, they do now. They have zero sort recycling, which means they have a big bin looks like a trash can, but it's specifically for all recycling, which means that it makes it easier to recycle, right? Because you can put all your recycling into the same container and you don't have to think about it as much. And so that also is a way to get people to hopefully recycle a little bit more, right?
Yes, sir.
Cool. And then just some kind of cool things to think about too. So those are things that we can do on an everyday basis, right? To help do our part, try to recycle as much as we can, really put that effort in, think about what we're just tossing instead of what we can actually recycle as well. But then there's some really cool things happening too that can hopefully help make recycling easier to do or more doable in general. And so I was reading something about robots being in recycling facilities now. So they've created some of these really cool robots that have different arms with vacuums at the end that are actually able to sort materials that are going through the factory on their. They've created robots that are able to distinguish different items and actually be able to sort them, so they can suck up like plastic bottles and put that in a plastic bin, or cardboard and put that in the cardboard bin. So that's pretty cool, right? That even technology now is getting on our side a little bit and helping us be better at recycling. So I thought that was really cool, and I would share that. I tried really hard to find a picture for you guys, but I couldn't find one. But just cool. I just wanted to put it out there that these are all examples of ways that we're trying to increase our recycling and do our part to take care of this problem, and they're really cool. All these ways are cool. And it can even happen at just, the individual tiny little class level. I had teachers when I was in school who provided incentive for us to go out and collect trash, and we even had it as little assignments in school to go out and have little competitions to see how much trash we could go out and pick up. So it's happening at all different levels, and it's all really good for the environment. And it's worked. There's trends that show that recycling has increased over the years, which is really good, and it's really positive, and it's a good thing to think about. And another really big one is, so we've talked really a lot just now about at home, what can we do, right? In terms of making sure we're doing our best to recycle. But there's lots of programs out there that are in place to have people go out and help pick up additional trash. So there's things like that here, even in Georgia on Tybee Island. They have regularly scheduled weekly or bi-weekly beach cleanups where I believe anybody from the public can go and get little bins and trash grabbers, and they can go out and be part of a fun beach cleanup. And they don't even just clean up all the trash, then they bring it back and they do what we were just talking about. They actually sort and recycle what they collect on the beach as a way to not only help clean up, but then also recycle it. So that's really a double positive, right? And this happens all over the place. So I did some research all the way up in the subarctic where all the polar bears are, right? And every year when I was in the subarctic, we had a day where everybody at the science center I was staying at, whether that be educators or students or people who worked at the science center, anybody who was there, it didn't matter who you were, if you wanted to, you could go out and they would provide all the trash bags and everything. And we would pick up hundreds and hundreds of pieces of trash just within a couple hours on this cleanup day. So these things are happening all over the place. And one really cool one is this company that was started by two surfers who really cared about their environment, and they really cared about keeping it clean, and they really recognized that there was a problem. And so they started their own company from the ground up and said, we're going to hire fishermen and their boats to go out and collect trash and recycle it. And their company took off. Like, people got really interested in it, and the way they kept supporting their company is they sold these bracelets. So anybody can buy this bracelet, and they've made a promise to collect 1 pound of trash from the oceans or other waterways for every bracelet that's sold. And just by starting that company, they've recovered over 13 million pounds of trash since 2017. So I thought that was really cool. I really wanted to share that one. So we're talking about weekly trash pickups just within an island or without a science center up in the subarctic, all the way to a company that started just from two guys wanting to help clean the environment, and it booming into something way bigger now. So lots of really cool examples of how there's a lot of interest and growing efforts to help remove trash and to get it recycled. And then there's other programs as well that are a bit more organized, even here within Georgia. That's the same thing. There are volunteer events that they organize to help clean up waterways, and then actually even come back and bring it back and recycle it and sort it out. And there's even some that happen at the global scale. So there's some programs called like the International Coastal Cleanup, where every year across the globe, they work with volunteer groups and just individuals and organize these really big trash cleanups. So I hope that's a little bit encouraging, and you guys realize that there's lots of opportunities that people can make efforts to help clean up and recycle, right? And what can anybody do even more than just recycling, right? So we have to do, does anybody have any ideas? Yeah? Right up front in the pink?
Ew, plastic is bad for you.
He said, what can we do to help? What else can we
If
do?
somebody try to
You can buy like water bottles so you don't have to keep putting plastic bottles.
Okay, so he said reusable water bottles.
Yep, absolutely. What else? Does anybody else have any ideas?
like you can help others do things they can't do.
How? That's a question. How?
You can
Let's see a hand all the way in the back, maybe.
Somebody said just volunteering to clean up in your community.
Sure, you got, yeah, anybody can volunteer, right? That's a big way. Yep. Any other ideas? I see a hand in the back on the far other side.
That's what somebody else just said.
start cleaning up around your area. Like
Sure.
where you're living, and that's what I do. I clean up where the area where I live.
Okay, so he says he cleans up where
Yeah.
around where he lives.
All right, that's awesome. So you guys have hit the big ideas, right? You can get things yourselves that help reduce how much plastic you use, and then you can also help clean up, right? So the two really big ways you can contribute are helping to clean up, but then also helping to reduce how much plastic you actually use to begin with, right? So if we all have, you know, our plastic water bottle, our reusable water bottles, then think about how many plastic water bottles, like Poland Springs bottles, you don't have to use and throw away or even recycle, right? Awesome. So I hope you all learned a little bit about one of our sources of pollution, but all of the ways as well that you can help to try to reduce this problem, and realize that it's possible to do things to help out. So with that, I can open it up to any questions that anybody might have. Oh, lots of questions. You guys are on it today. I love it.
Of course, Boba is helping. It's helping is good. It's helping is good.
And you said when you were talking about us, when your teacher told y'all had activities going outside picking up trash, did y'all was like recycling?
Okay, so he said when your teacher did a project with you, were you guys recycling as a class? Like, did y'all sort it?
So what we did is we all picked it up, and then we took pictures with it, and we brought it in, and we showed at the beginning of class. We had to prove that we went out and we actually collected trash. Now, we didn't bring it back into school because we didn't want to bring all that stinky trash in. But then individually, yes, I brought it back home, and then I sorted it and recycled what I could. And then anything I couldn't recycle, I put into my trash can. So that way it at least wasn't out in the environment, right? We still got it contained into a cleaner area. Great question.
Why did y'all have to like pick up plastic?
Why would you not?
Why do we have to pick up plastic? So that's a good question. So it's because we don't want it to break down into those smaller plastics, right? So now we were talking about it can start as something like a water bottle, but then it can break down into really small small pieces of microplastics. So remember, we were talking about those really tiny seed-sized pieces of plastic, and that's the plastic that can really start to spread into different environments really easily. And then once they're in those different environments, they can be a lot more difficult to get out. So it's easier, if you think about it, what's easier to pick up, one seashell or 100 pieces of sand, right? It's going to be easier just to pick up that shell, and you want to get it before it turns into those smaller microplastics. All the way in the back, maybe?
So, did you know that you were in the school that was when you were at picking up the plastic at school? Did you notice that you were in the dirty colony?
What did I say?
We were learning about, we're currently in, I have to teach science and social studies. So right now we're learning social studies, and we're learning about the original colonies. And so when you said Maine and Delaware, they got very excited because they recognized the names. And so Keel just mentioned, he was like, did you know when you were doing that, when you were growing up, that you were living in the original 13 colonies? He was very excited to share that with you.
Oh, awesome. I love it. Hey, if you guys ever get the chance to go visit Maine, it's beautiful. I love it.
Also, I think we have one more question, Mr. Tom.
Okay.
Can animals die if they eat plastic?
So his question is, do animals die if they eat the plastic?
So I didn't read too much about that, but it's definitely not good for them, right? It's not a natural food source. It can definitely cause problems. It would depend on the size of the plastic. So I have a feeling those pieces of plastic, like those bigger ones, like a turtle that consumes a full plastic bag, is not going to be doing as great as, some of these animals that eat those tiny little microplastics. Like some of those may even be able to be filtered out as well, but some of them may retain some of those microplastics, but those microplastics might not, kill an animal right away.
I think that's all of our questions, Mr. Tom.
Okay. Thanks so much for joining me today, you guys. I hope you have a good rest of your day, okay?
What do we say?
You're welcome. Take care, everybody. Bye.